All right, welcome back. We have done well over the course of this morning with our agenda, and so we're able to move right now into the kind of the closing portions of our meeting, really. Just to recap, there will be a proposal made as to the specifics of our revised work program that we want to put out for public consultation, which we will be tabling in our October virtual meeting, and should have a specific kind of timeline and process to talk about around that then. So we have a couple of any other business items, and we have some administrative other business, which we will do in private session following the close of the public session. But for the any other business that's actually relevant to our due process, we have first of all an agenda item that's been held over from yesterday. This is the proposed membership for the Technical Committee on Human Rights Disclosures, which we delayed pending the full complement of our membership being present. Unfortunately, we've now got 2 of our members who haven't come back to the table yet. However, why don't we press ahead, assuming we have a quorum? Yes. Yeah? Can someone, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, counting 11 around the table. I think we need 12. Oh no, Daniel's on the line. So then we do have a quorum. Okay. But I'm pretty sure that Sulema would like to be part of that conversation because of, here we go. I got lost. Yeah. Right, okay. So the proposed membership for the Technical Committee on Human Rights Disclosure. We had some discussion about this yesterday, and as you'll recall, I want to push us to make some clear decisions around this. We had some, just to refresh everybody's memory, we had some recommendations from the Standards Board yesterday that we expand some of the business representation on the committee. I can tell you that I have every confidence that full and robust efforts have been made to identify the whole universe of people who may be available to this, and there aren't in existence lists of other candidates that could easily slot into this working group given the level of expertise and the amount of time that we are requiring people to have to be able to bring to this work. So if there are to be changes made, they will not be straightforward. They will not be simple. We also have a design criterion for this technical committee that we would balance the representation between business and civil society, and therefore a change in one category requires a change in the other category, and it opens up the question as to remaining categories as well. So I would like to go back to this discussion as where we left it yesterday, and to ask for the GSSB to now deal with the specific question as to approval of the proposed slate of candidates and or the kind of re-examination of the debate points that we were going through yesterday. Do we have anyone who'd like to open the discussion on that? Kirsten.
I respect that every possible thing has been done to try to get more from the business constituency. Still, I would urge to make a last try on doing that, and but we could still approve the memberships as they currently are, but trying to find a third from the business constituency. On a more principled basis, I do believe that when somebody are titled an independent expert and are not being a candidate with their employer assigned, that's a governance challenge. That would not be in compliance with how I see all kind of recommendations for appointing people to boards, etc. So to me, it's difficult to accept this person. I don't know her at all, so it's nothing personal with her. This is from a strict principle basis as a business constituency representative.
Could I have a process check on that particular point? Because I'm under the impression, for example, in governance bodies, that we serve in our individual capacity.
Yeah, we do.
We have an affiliation, as it were, for identification purposes, but we don't sit here on behalf of any employer or organization to which we might be affiliated. Yeah.
I certainly agree to that, but still, I see it from a transparency perspective as challenging, and this is about which constituency do you really represent? That you are employed by someone doesn't really change that perspective.
Okay, so if I can just recap what you're suggesting, Kirsten, it's that you would still like to see further efforts made to increase representation from the business constituency. Nevertheless, you would be happy to approve this slate of candidates pending, final efforts on that. I would also just note that because of the design criteria, it would require us to increase the civil society representation as well at the same time. Yes?
I respect that we have a design criteria like that, but in many ways it's a bit difficult for me to see the real borders between civil society representatives and what some of the representatives that are now included as mediating institutions. I don't know if that helps to the formalities, but it's just an observation.
Dwight?
I think the balance in this particular committee is right. And the reason is part of its work requires a deep familiarity with the UN guiding principles, because the mandate of the committee is to examine that instrument and fit it in not only with the existing human rights standards in the GRI, but also with how some of the concepts of that might apply to other standards. So in order to do this mandate of this committee, it's really at least half of the qualification to be on it needs to be a familiarity with this instrument. And I think that justifies many of the experts that have been identified in this proposal. Now, that's the first thing, and that would include both of the business representatives, because both of them have this deep familiarity with the UN guiding principles that exists. And if we were to say, well, we need a third one, we're going to have that as the main criteria. And I'm not sure what a third business person with deep familiarity would add to this kind of committee. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, I don't think it should ever, in the work of the GSSB, be an automatic assumption that every committee should have a larger representation from business than from any other group. There are certain matters that would suggest that not be true. For instance, this recently created technical committee on health and safety standards. We had this discussion, and there was an agreement that the representatives of workers should be at least as equal as the representative of employers. So I would then say that you shouldn't have that kind of criteria in this committee, in the sense that given what the work of this committee is doing, it's going to be much more important to be familiar with the interests of rights holders than and the large variety of rights holders that there are. And so if we were to increase another business person, I would then say that we would need to look at the rights holders and maybe look at the need to have, for instance, indigenous peoples, for instance, victims of environmental destruction and other kinds of victims that would be the kind of representatives that would need to be dealt with in human rights disclosures. And so I think that would be wrong. Finally, there is this idea that, and I accept it fully, that in all of this work you need to have people who do the reporting present, because even if they're not there because of the particular subject, the subject is reporting, so you need to have report preparers there. But I think that is taken care of to the extent that it is needed in this proposal. Later on, this is the first of two parts. Later on, we will then move into a different committee to look at specific disclosures that have been identified. And there, of course, would be, I think, a larger role for report preparers than is needed in this conceptual committee. So and then finally, I think we need to keep the size relatively small, because the concepts require a lot of discussion, and the important thing to be efficient is to get the people with the expertise in the room, and I think that we have in this proposal the right people. And I think we have the right mix, and I don't think it would be right to change the mix or our ability to find the sort of deep background that we need would also be a challenge and require a lot more time, and particularly since we would be wanting to add more civil society members.
Thank you. Stian.
Thank you, Judy. I support the proposal. The fact is, human rights is rising in importance with all ESG surveys, questionnaires, etc. And at the end of the day, it's coming back to the GSSB to approve whatever is proposed. And we need to be practical. As Michelle indicated this morning, there are issues, there are difficulties in, for example, reporting on strikes in China, etc. So we also need to look at it from a practical perspective in terms of reporting, but we need to respect human rights at the end of the day. And as I mentioned yesterday, it's human rights in the broader sense. You mentioned indigenous people. What do we do, for example, with people in the Philippines being threatened by rising sea levels? Those are the types of issues that I'm sure the team will flesh out during the process. So I'm in support of it, and at the end of it, we'll come back to the GSSB. Thank you.
Kirsten.
As Dwight wasn't here yesterday when we discussed this topic, I would just like to remind the audience that my main concern yesterday was the lack of practical reporting competence in the group. It's not that there aren't enough or it isn't 1/3 business in there. it's the practical reporting competence, because I do believe to make practical good standards that will be used, we need to make sure that they are also possible to use in a good way. And while the UN guiding principles are good in many ways, they aren't really a good reporting tool. And that was my main concern, and that is still my main concern in this context.
I don't want to go over old ground, but I also don't want to let the record reflect that it's just Kirsten out there on this objection, because I have the same objection. I think that business is a little bit underweight in this panel. I'm not arguing that we should have more business representation. I just don't know that the mix of business representation as we have here is would represent, like you said, the practical reporting angle, and people have to interpret complex human rights methodologies in terms of how businesses actually report on them and perform on them. So I would not let it keep me from moving forward with the committee, but I do think that it stuck out to me as a dissatisfying element with the composition of the personnel involved.
What can I ask, if any, is the difference between a technical committee and a project working group as it concerns the creation of proposed reporting standards, such that it would make a different argument for this practical expertise?
I think the most important difference here is that probably was having a working group, we would formalize this constituency element more. I think, strictly speaking, for a technical committee, you are not, there's still the recommendation to look at the balance, but it is really the call of the GSSB. And I think it's a bit harder to argue that case for a working group. Having said that, in the end, it always comes down to the decision of this committee and the discussions we just had. So just from our perspective, there is clearly something here in that first phase of the project where we work on a conceptual level. The more people we have in the group, the more difficult in our experience these discussions will be, because it is you're conflating all kinds of different perspectives then into something where is actually generally agreement probably around experts, and it is more a recipe on how to bring that back into the standards. So yeah, that's what I can say about it. And again, to your opening remarks, Judy, just right now we're just looking for guidance. We can implement all trajectories probably, but depending on what you ask us to do in addition to what's on paper right now, we have to flag that it might be a time component thing coming in where we cannot confirm a member for a couple of months. That is not that we know this now, but it is definitely not a matter of 2 weeks or so to find another business member. Think of 2 months, right? And then we could still start the process as planned because we have the person in 2 months, but we might also not have the person in 2 months.
And maybe not to put too fine a point on it, but when we had the discussion yesterday, there were recommendations, talk to some of the various other candidates for their recommendations as to their members who could participate. That's already been done. And in those cases, they've all said, you need to have this person on that committee. Is that am I not stating that correctly?
So out of the experts that were involved in the RAGI process, the person that we have now as a practitioner was recommended, but also more broadly speaking, a lot of the people that we talk to, they have a keen interest in being involved in the second phase, where we develop disclosures for specific rights, probably, or revisit existing disclosures. But on the conceptual phase, I think this is oftentimes where the practitioners don't have the background, or not always the background to engage in these discussions. And so, yeah, that's what we can say about this right now. But having said that, we can always try. That's not the point that I'm trying to make.
Lema.
Just revisiting my experience on trying to engage with people who are working with the mining companies and oil and gas companies and power companies as advisors and as the main person in charge of managing human rights. 3 out of 4 of them, they do not have experience on reporting. They do have experience on applying the UN principles on business human rights. Having said that, I really think that taking into consideration your point, and I think it's a valid point, but trying to engage with the right person with in-depth understanding of the UN guiding principles and with reporting experience, I'm not sure if it's feasible within the time frame that we do have to put this on working. And on the other hand, 3 out of 4 of those colleagues that I've contacted in terms of engaging with this technical committee, they told to me, I'm very interested in participating at a later stage of this process. So I really think that we should reinforce the technical background as well as the reporting experience for the next phase.
Dwight, did you want to get in there?
I'm sorry. It's also in the preparation for this committee done by the Secretariat. They examined the nature of the reporting of human rights as the practice is now, and it's pretty dismal. We're not looking at a situation where best practice is in fact something that can be usably considered best practice. The human rights reporting is very poor, and there are some, I think, political and legal reasons for that. But that's one of the reasons why we need this kind of conceptual work first. I don't think we're at the stage where looking at a company's actual practice and the practitioners of the reporting is the important thing right now. There's some other things that I think have to occur first, and so you know, I think we've got something that's right. And like I said, if we were to expand this committee, I think it would be people with an understanding of what the victims of human rights abuse are and what their relationship is to business activity. And I think that that's not necessary if we keep it at this size.
Okay, I think I'd like to get a sense around the room here whether, first of all, we have consensus as to the wish to have another go at trying to find another business representative for this technical committee now. Do we have consensus around that? If so, it follows that we have consensus that we have to do the same on the civil society side, unless there is actually a change in the criteria that we want to make. I also want to find out whether there's consensus that this is a requirement for the technical committee to go forward. If it is not, I think we need to test at what point we sort of cut off that activity. Do we sort of try forever to put another person onto it, or do we say if it doesn't happen by a certain point in the process, we've done our best and we carry on with it? I want to kind of move it to a conclusion, and I think we have to pull this apart a little bit.
Yeah, just from the implementation perspective, so we have a list of experts that we are proposing here. We will have to work with them in the coming weeks to confirm dates for the first half of next year. If we don't do that in the next 3 or 4 weeks, we will lose these people because they have busy agendas. We're asking them to block 5 meetings. So we will have to go ahead with that in any case. If we're deciding today that we cannot approve this membership, I'm reasonably sure that we will lose 2 or 3 of these members in the next weeks because they've all come back to us urging us to confirm dates early next year. We've actually, in fact, moved the start of the project already because people are running out of possibilities to meet in November and December.
Yeah. Okay, yes, Daniel, please go ahead.
Daniel, is that for me? I just simply wanted to say that I support moving forward with this list, that if another business actor with nuts and bolts experiences does materialize, I would recommend putting that person on the list. But I would not wait any further, and I would not condition moving forward on obtaining that candidate. I suggest we do move forward.
Thank you for that. Any other thoughts? Kirsten, do you want to offer your view on these various pieces, these various options that are sort of contained in this decision here? First of all, does the going forward of this group need to be conditioned on adding another business constituency member, for example?
I think that your conclusion, Judy, or your proposal, to have we have consensus about the 12 on the list, no, the 10, well, whatever number it is, and that we should try to add one more from the business constituency, and then consequently one more from the civil society constituency. That's fine with me.
Okay. Other views on Dwight?
My view is that we should go with the recommendations as it is. I think the Secretariat put a lot of work into it, and I think adding 1 and 1 will create a lot of problems. First of all, it's more work. Second of all, as Bastian says, there's the scheduling. And third of all, I just don't think it's necessary. I think that what we want to do with this group, the number is right and the balance is right. And so if we're formulating which way to go, I think that should be a proposal that is on the table, in short, what was already put on the table by the Secretariat, in addition to any other proposal. But I think that should not be put aside. I think that is still the best option.
Kirsten?
I must admit that I don't really understand what the next step here is. Dwight has been referring to that several times, but even though I've read through the terms of reference, I didn't really catch that, but that might be a fundamental lack of understanding of the difference of a technical committee and a work group. Mm-hmm.
Personally, I feel like I'm spending a lot of time being pedantic today around a couple of things, but at the risk of doing so with this, I'd like to have a better sense for what it would mean to try to find a third business constituency representative. At what point will we know that we have tried? And can therefore satisfy ourselves that we have fulfilled whatever the requirement is here.
So just as an input to that discussion, very practically, I think we have a window of 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. In 2.5 weeks, we will need to propose the agenda items for your next call. If we don't have a person by then, if we want to go down that road, you will not be able to decide upon adding that person in a timely manner, and we won't be able to implement it, which will delay the project. So there is a window, and really, I think we would start from scratch now. We have exhausted our possibilities. We talked to all the parties that were mentioned yesterday, including the ICMMs and others. If there are ideas for these people, they would need to be produced by this board, I think, at this stage. We've practically run out of possibilities here.
Okay. Zulema and Dwight.
I do support Dwight's proposal. I don't think we do have time to pursue whatever has been pursued for the past 2 months.
If we were to decide on trying to find somebody else in this 2.5 week window, we'd be talking about finding 2 people, not 1. And so I think that should be taken into consideration.
Kent.
Yeah, I would agree at this point. I think, with the fact that there's a 2-week window, you're not going to reasonably do the kind of search that you would want to do to find the kind of person that we're looking for. I don't think that that's practical, and I understand the concerns about the committee as it's proposed. I think they're good concerns, but at this point, I would move to just go ahead with the committee as it's been recommended.
Thank you. To Kirsten's earlier point about the kind of, we're possibly looking at a multi-stage process here of coming up with proposed changes to standards, new standards, deletions from standards, all this sort of stuff. Could you maybe just quickly summarize for us what that looks like? Because it might help to kind of, to at least contextualize what's at stake with this particular technical committee.
Yes, so I think this project was conceptualized in 2 phases. In the first phase, we are looking at the UN guiding principles, importantly, but I think also at instruments like the OECD work around due diligence that is emerging. And the most important question right now to the expert is, which are the concepts that we want to carry over from these, from the UN guiding principles in particular into the human rights related standards, but at large all standards maybe. And there are some concepts that might have to be, or at least that could be a recommendation, be carried through the full set of standards by introducing them to the management approach. And it's that conceptual work that needs to happen first. As part of the conceptual work, we would probably also screen through, and that would be probably aided by research, the current validity of the disclosure offering that we have in the standards. And that would then inform a recommendation of the experts to say we will need to look at those existing human rights related standards in light of the recommendation, and maybe generate new standards, also cover new topics. That might be an outcome as well. But for these follow-on projects, we would probably need to bring in different expertise, because take again this indigenous rights issue, take for that matter child labor over any of the other forced labor, any of these issues that are currently falling into that domain, they require specific expertise. And if I had to reflect on the discussions we had with the candidates that are put forward now, this is where some of them say, well, this is not my domain, this is not my level of expertise. I have an opinion, but there are more qualified issue level experts that we would have to bring into the mix. We hope that this committee could help us to recruit these people and bring them into the discussions. But this is also where we would probably start to work very specifically with certain sectors that are involved in these debates, and then recruit industry representation from them as well. But it's really that divide. For now, it's a conceptual recommendation. It will not have immediate outcomes probably in terms of disclosures, and certainly not something, it will move through the whole process of public consultation and everything as well. And Laura, you will.
Just to add to that, in the process we have also built a field test or expert roundtable to socialize the recommendations of the technical committee, and then is where we can also engage reporting companies and other experts to sort of validate the recommendations before they are shared with the GSSB.
Dwight.
Just following on to what Bastian said, that's one of the reasons I feel strongly is this is part 1. This is the first phase. And I think one of the things that I regret about this discussion is it might seem, well, what I'm trying to say is I think the Secretariat did a marvelous job of getting this set of names together. Some of these people are the very best in the world about one of the most important subjects in the world. I mean, and it's a real dream team. And I think that that shouldn't be overlooked. And I think it's the right team for this first part. The second part, I think, will involve inevitably other people. But when you get something right, it would be a shame to decide that you hadn't.
Can I just ask whether this bit of context we've been having about the broader process here helps to alleviate some of the concern about the practical reporting perspective, and whether or not we can be satisfied that we will, before any kind of actual standards content is proposed, that we will have a proper process to incorporate that. Kirsten, please.
Yes, I think that what Laura added is most clarifying, and especially I would like to include that in the minutes, that that's a part of the decision of approving the members of the technical committee.
Thank you. Dwight, do you still want to? No? Okay. Could I then ask whether we're ready to call the question around this proposed technical committee membership? Do we have consensus around the table then as to this slate of candidates? I see a shaking of a head. Right. Michel, would you like to speak further?
Well, I tend to agree with Kirsten, but I also agree with Dwight. I think we should start as soon as possible. And I expect, I mean, at this stage, we haven't yet even framed what is within human rights or not. So I think it will be a multi-stage process, and I would prefer to start now, and when needed, pay particular attention to the feedback of business representatives.
So for the purposes of starting that process, do we have consensus around this proposed slate of candidates? Okay. I don't see particular dissent. Right? Yeah. Good. Okay. Is that enough for the record then to say that this seems to have been adopted by consensus? Do I need to have a yes? It's been adopted. Okay. Thank you very much for that. And I think, yeah, I mean, I think it's merely a reflection of how important this material is. That we want to get it right. We want to do the right thing for all of our stakeholders here, which is why this is so important. I believe that's the only any other business item that we have for the public session that's relevant to our due process. We have a few administrative other business items, but pending any other sort of final items that people wish to raise at this point, I believe we are now at the end of the public meeting. And I would like to thank all the members and all of the Standards Division team, the GRI Secretariat, our tech support, and everyone else who helps to make these decisions possible and helps to support us in our process along the way. Thank you very much, and we will reconvene a public meeting in October by our virtual meeting as according to the published schedule. Thank you.